I am a huge fan of cheesecake. Not every cheesecake, though. Specifically, the New York style cheesecake, because it's clean and simple. I don't mind toppings, but I prefer them on the side as to not interfere with the cheesecake. Making a great cheesecake is very challenging, but also very rewarding. Nothing is more important while baking a cheesecake than patience. Now you might be saying to yourself that quality ingredients are the most important part of baking a cheesecake. And you would be right, to a point. Although quality ingredients are an important part, I can assure you that quality ingredients count for nothing if you don't have the patience to bake them properly. I am going to share with you the best way I have found to make a perfect cheesecake, or at least perfect for me. First, I will be going over the ingredients and time you will need to bake the cheesecake. It might seem like an obvious first step to make sure you have not only the right ingredients to bake a cheesecake, but enough time to bake it too. But it is also one of the most easily forgotten and overlooked steps in the process. The total baking time from preparation to cooling will take about 8 hours. Now that might seem like a little extreme and a very long time, but most of that time is the cheesecake cooling off and setting, and not necessarily the mixing of ingredients or even baking. The non-food items you will need include one large mixing bowl, two medium mixing bowls, one 9-inch spring-form pan, a rubber spatula, and preferably an electric hand mixer. You can mix the ingredients by hand if you want, but it is much, much easier to use an electric mixer. You will also need to make sure you have enough room in the refrigerator and, of course, an oven. For the food items, you'll need several ingredients, including at least 15 graham crackers, 2 tablespoons of butter, 32 ounces of cream cheese, 1½ cup of sugar, 3/4 cup of milk, 4 eggs, 1 pint of sour cream, 2 tablespoons vanilla extract, and 1/4 cup of flour. This might seem like a lot of ingredients, but they are the combined ingredients you will need to not only make the filling, but also the crust and topping as well. Once you have made sure you have all of these ingredients and items, and you have checked to make sure you have enough time to not only bake the cheesecake, but to let it set, you are ready to get started. You are going to want to preheat the oven to 350 degrees and grease the 9-inch springform pan. Also, if you have not already, now would be the time to check your fridge to make sure that there is enough room to put the cheesecake on a shelf to help it cool. Also, another tip would be to put some aluminum foil underneath the cheesecake so that the ingredients do not leak through. The cheesecake recipe can be broken into 3 main sections: crust, filling, and topping. You will need to allow time for each section to not only bake, but to cool as well. This is where the patience becomes extremely important. It is possible to buy a graham cracker crust from the store, but nothing beats a graham cracker crust that is made from scratch. Starting with the crust, you will need to crush about 15 graham crackers and hand mix them in the medium bowl with 2 tablespoons of butter and 1/4 cup of sugar. The best way to do this is to put the graham crackers in a Ziploc bag. This way, when you crush the graham crackers, you do not lose any of the crumbs and it does not make a huge mess in your kitchen. Once the graham crackers have been thoroughly mixed, press the crumb mixture into the springform pan evenly to create the crust. Once you have finished pressing the crust into the pan and the oven is preheated, place the crust into the oven and bake the crust for 10 minutes. After the crust has baked, remove it and set the crust in the refrigerator to let it cool. While the crust is cooling, it is the perfect time to start making the filling. In the large mixing bowl, mix the cream cheese and sugar using the electric hand mixer until smooth. While you are continuing to mix, add 1 tablespoon vanilla, 3/4 cup of milk, 1 cup of sugar, and 3 eggs, one at a time until it has all been incorporated. Next, you're going to want to add the flour a little bit at a time until the flour has been incorporated. Adding all of the flour all at once will make it difficult to mix properly as it will get too thick too fast. Once you have finished mixing all of the ingredients and you have a smooth filling, remove the crust from the refrigerator and pour the filling into the crust, making sure that it sits evenly. Place the cheesecake in the oven and bake for 1 hour. One tip I found useful was from Danilo Alfaro in his article on tips for making the perfect cheesecake. Danilo recommends not poking anything into the cheesecake to check if it's done. The best way to check if it's done is to gently shake the cheesecake. You want it to be firm on the edges, but still wobbly into the center. After the cheesecake is done baking, remove the cheesecake and let it cool down to room temperature. Once it is at room temperature, set it in the refrigerator for about 1 hour before adding the topping. The reason you don't set the filling directly into the refrigerator straight from the oven is that you do not want the filling to be subjected to an extreme change of temperature, as this will cause the cheesecake to crack. While the filling is cooling, take the medium mixing bowl and mix 1/4 cup of sugar, 1 pint of sour cream, and 1 tablespoon of vanilla into the bowl until smooth. You can use a spoon or a regular hand mixer, but for best results, use the electric hand mixer. Once the filling has completely cooled, pour the topping on top of the filling, spreading it evenly with a rubber spatula. Place the cheesecake back into the oven and bake it for 30 minutes. After it is done baking, remove the cheesecake and let it return to room temperature. Once it has cooled, place it back in the fridge for at least 6 to 7 hours. For the best results, let it sit overnight, as the longer the cheesecake is in the refrigerator, the longer it has to set and the more solid it becomes. This is the best way I have found to make a perfect cheesecake, although a lot of tricks I spoke about I learned through trial and error. The first time I had ever baked a cheesecake was when I was in high school. It was my grandmother on my dad's side's recipe. She used to make it all the time and was one of my father's favorite desserts. After she passed away, no one would make it, which I thought was just their preference for other desserts. When I was in high school, one of my classes was a cooking class, and I wanted to bake a cheesecake as one of my projects. I asked my mother for my grandmother's cheesecake recipe, and she reluctantly gave me the recipe, but said she would only supervise and take no part in helping cook. At the time, I thought she was just trying to be supportive by trusting me to bake it all on my own. I baked it the night before Thanksgiving, and I wanted my whole family to try my dessert. As it was my first time baking this recipe, I was in no hurry and I was very careful and patient while baking, which definitely helped. After completing the recipe, I served it to my family. Everyone waited for my father to take the first bite. It turns out he is extremely protective of his mother's recipe, and my mother and everyone else in my family was too scared to try to bake it for fear of the wrath of my dad, which I only found out after I finished baking it. Fortunately, he really enjoyed it, and since then my mother has been baking it for every holiday. As I've stated before, patience is the most important thing when baking a cheesecake, as I have found out the hard way in my experiences. A few years back I was going to meet my girlfriend's parents for the first time and I wanted to make a good impression and bring them my cheesecake. Unfortunately, by the time I had decided to bake one, I had not left myself enough time, and I would need to rush. I started baking without first figuring out how much time I needed or seeing if I had the correct ingredients. I had to run out in the middle of baking to get more sugar, which cut down even more on the time that I had to bake. While the filling was baking, I was making the topping so it would be ready as soon as the filling was done baking. I did not have the patience to properly follow the directions, so as soon as the filling was done baking, I pulled it out of the oven and immediately poured the cold topping on top of the still very hot and not yet set filling. Instead of the sitting on top of the filling, it sunk to the bottom of the cake, ruining it. leaving me with not enough ingredients and definitely not enough time to start over, especially if this time I was to do it right and take the time required. Since that debacle, I have learned quite a bit. I always start baking at least 2 days prior to give myself enough time to be patient and to start again if I do make a mistake. I have the timing down pat now and learned that if I ever feel myself feeling rushed and wanting to hurry, that is the time to take a break. It's always better to take a small break in the middle than to have to start over because a step was overlooked. What is nice about cheesecake is that it can be personalized and customized to the individual. Adding different toppings such as strawberries or cherries or even chocolate is one of the special things about cheesecake, but in my opinion, nothing beats the original. While quality ingredients and following the recipe will definitely help with making a good cheesecake, not rushing and taking your timing is the most important thing.